Thanks everyone, I'm going to be moderating, so why don't we start by just doing quick 30-second intros on everyone on our fine panel. Jason, can we start with you?
Sure. I'm Jason Cox. I'm a professor of art education at the University of Toledo.
I'm Kate Hill. I am this is my regular job. I'm a librarian at the University of North Carolina, Greensboro. And I also help run Larp Shack in Durham, North Carolina.
I'm Nuncio Davis. I am a game designer and writer. I do like freeform games and tabletop games and card games and all sorts of games.
My name is Cameron Betts. I'm currently the president of New Interactive Literature, and I've been designing and playing in LARPs for over 10 years.
I'm Morgan Nuncio. I am part of the Austin crew. I help with Austin Art Meetup and the Austin ETX Art Production, where we try to put on one-shot games probably every quarter of the year. Trace key term, we're young and still working at it, but I also am a web designer as well. So.
Thanks everyone. So let's get started with our first question to warm everyone up. What do you love about playing with romance? Just as a theme. What's your favorite thing about it? What draws you to it?
So, I think that when you're in the middle of all these kind of large narratives, it's easy to lose that which is most human. And in many ways, I think that's what romance is. Whether or not it's me pursuing or being the object of romance, or reflecting on romance that once was, or facilitating romance, or even honestly just observing it among other characters. So it is a point of humanity within a structure that when the designer first thinks of it is essentially it's an abstract. It is inhuman until the players come and inject humanity into it, and romance is a large part of that.
We're going down the line. Okay.
Wait.
Oh, okay. Sounds cool. So for me, I feel that I am a person who loves just a relation. I'm a relationship-focused person. That is how I think. And to me, I guess it is that is plain love and romance is one of the deepest ways to connect to another person. And so I love bringing that into my designs and bringing that into my play, because it allows me to very deeply connect to not only the world that I'm playing in, but to other players, and form an incredibly close bond often with those players, even though it is not necessarily a romantic bond after game, but it is such a fun and deeply moving thing to explore, and such a deeply human thing, and almost spiritual thing to explore. So that is what I love about love and romance in games.
For me, I'm going to say it's a stifling awkwardness. Because like there is some safety in the fact that like when you're in a game, it's a temporary experience, and you can have the awkwardness is almost a goal in some games, or can be. Maybe it's just how I play, but there is a safety net that games provide for you to explore things that in real life you wouldn't really want to explore necessarily, like angsty romances or like maybe unhealthy dynamics, stuff that like we maybe love in romance novels or movies or other media, but in real life we wouldn't want that experience in our actual relationships. But we get to experience them for a time in very real ways many times in games, and especially in LARP. And I think that since it's explored in so many other mediums, this is like, LARP is kind of the perfect hands-on exploration of it.
So I think as a designer, I think there are two things I really like about romance. The first one is that it's an engine that relies on trust between players, which I think is really at the core of a lot of play in LARP. And the reason that I put it into my games often is because I also find it to be naturally self-transformational. When you get two people who have different opinions, the process of romance is about them figuring out how to become one or not become one, and that process transforms the characters. When I play it, I like it a lot because it contextualizes the rest of what's going on for me. Like I care more about the world that I'm in, the people that I'm near, because through the lens of this this romance to this other person or people, and so I feel more connected.
For me, I love love. Like it's good, and also love isn't just that romantic love as well. It's loves the friendships and the platonics and the crushes and the various stages of crushes as well. So playing LARPs that have like love and romance and crushes and all that help me understand more about my queer diversity of like where I'm landing right now and how that's helping me reflect and understand who I am. So that's. Yeah, it just helps me, and I enjoy it. And you know, I've seen so many LARPs in general that are about violence and gore and hatred. I'm like, what about the romance? What about the friendship? What about the saucy knife in the back corner? Like and so it gives it definitely a great turning point from what you see typically in LARP. So that's fun.
Nice, thank you, everyone. I want to follow up on something that Clio pointed out, which is that LARP in a way is kind of perfect to explore romance specifically. Does anyone else have a follow-up on that, or can think about what makes LARP well suited to this theme?
Well, I mean, I think that there are two things. First of all, because LARP is not a linear medium, you can engage and discover the level of the romance in a collaborative way that allows for a lot of choice and immersion. And I think that the authenticity of romance is often in that dance between how close are we going to be, how far apart are we going to be, without necessarily the sort of weight of linear structure pushing you together, like if you think about movies or books or anything, like there is some externalized design which is going to predict the outcome of it, and this feels more authentic because it has an unpredictable outcome that is entirely the decision of people involved in that romance and anyone who has influence on it.
To me, it's again because I guess all mediums are all about relationships and dynamics between people, but to me, tabletop and LARP especially that is their core. Like without the dynamics that you have between people and the relationships that you form in game, there is nothing in a LARP to me. Like that is how you interact directly with people. You are interacting and looking at them in the face and engaging in that way, and it's so much more of an important part. Like you can write things without relationship dynamics and things like that. You can write LARPs without relationship dynamics, obviously, but because they're so baked in, so fundamental to my concept and design of how those work, that's to me why it is such a great medium to explore relationships in all their forms, but of course, love is an important part of that as well.
For all of you, although I think some of you who are designers will have a lot to say about this, in what way do you use romantic relationships in game to reinforce other themes that you're exploring? And again, we can go down the line unless.
I'll start first.
Morgan.
I actually wrote a game called, it was a LARP jam game that I made called colormatch.com. It was basically exploration on awkward online dating, speed dating, queerdom, and just relationships in general. And also being a queer woman of color, it's definitely something I take interest as well because of romance in general. So taking the queerdom, taking the romance, taking all this mixed together with kinks and whatnot, and people having these things, and it really helps me try to figure out like what I'm trying to explore through gaming itself and how other people try to interact with that. And I lost my train of thought, so I'm just gonna let it go down the way, and there you go.
Gotcha. I don't know if I have an answer to this off the bat. I don't tend to design games that are heavily single themed, and the role that romance often plays in my designs is to allow for escapes from other themes. So like if you are a person who's very interested in classically, in some political thing, and you need to be able to take a break from it or divert from it either temporarily or permanently, the romance gives you an option out of that. So in some ways, I use it to subvert my themes rather than to support them.
Yeah, I think similarly to Morgan, like when I'm explicitly writing in mechanics for romance or writing relationships, I do try to not only allow but encourage for as much queerness as possible. Just because I think when I was growing up, it wasn't really present, so now I'm just kind of on overload, like trying to make as much as possible. But that also, just with other themes or whatever the general genre of the game is, because maybe it's not necessarily a romance, maybe it's a horror game, or maybe it's a mystery or something. Whatever the main conflict is of that, I try to have the romance tied into that somehow. And it's kind of hard to generalize about that because it's such a case-by-case basis. But if fear is a huge part of the game, let's say, then there's going to be not only that overarching like theme of it, but in the romance itself, there's going to be something to be afraid of within that relationship. Whether it's, do I really know who the other person is? Are they hiding something from me? Or do I really know who I am? Or like, will this last beyond this point of the horizon?
I don't feel like I'm a good enough, I have not designed enough games to answer this question, so I'm gonna skip.
We can talk about it in terms of play, because you've certainly.
I played a lot of romance.
If you want to skip.
I'm
All right.
Yes.
So normally when I'm designing games, I design them that they require a heavy amount of player interaction in determining the context and the nature of the relationship. So I don't design romance per se, but rather an environment where romance is possible or even encouraged. That being said, when we're setting up the relationships, whether tabletop, LARP, or whatever, when romance is on the table or any kind of relationship, what I'm looking for is something that makes it problematic. Because if it's perfect, it's not interesting, and frankly, it's not realistic either. Whether I'm playing it or I'm working with others to set it up, I'm looking for what is the fly in the ointment. And that is normally more emergent than by design for me.
So to get to play, actually, which is next on my list, when you're playing a romance in a LARP, what are some of the experiences or the questions or the aspects of self that you're exploring by that play?
You want to just go back down the other
I
way?
kind of like this ping pong that we got.
I'd say I'm going to go with transformation. When you are engaging in romance, the people that are involved are going to change. They're making a choice or feel compelled to change, and then as the romance progresses, more change will occur. Whether or not it persists, to engage in this relationship is to engage in a change of self. And that is what I am expecting and looking for. And as well as, if you're playing with romance, it's nice to have your heart go pitter-pat. It is complicated to have your heart go pitter-pat, but it's one of the reasons that we engage in LARP is the very valuable embodied experience of the taste of those emotions.
What kind of questions and things
And experiences,
we are looking for?
what are you seeking when you're exploring romance and LARP?
So, I don't know. To me, one of them actually, so Jason took a lot of what I was going to say, which is fine. Thanks, Jason. I am not happy. I never want a character to stand still. That's boring. So, to me, romance is a way to push them in a direction that I didn't expect. So, like, I really like to kind of set up a romance and basically leave it open as the play goes and not know what the ending is going to be. Have no arc really in mind, because I like to see how I'm going to react in that moment and where that's going to push me and what depths or new experiences that's going to make my character and therefore myself feel. I like that ambiguity and that uncertainty of that. I also love playing romance because I like to do it and then incorporate a lot of other people into it. I am a fan of romantic stories in general. I am a hopeless romantic. Like, that is just what I have always been drawn to. And I love to tell those stories, and I love to engage other people in those stories. To me, a romance that, if I'm playing a romance and it's not affecting other players outside of just that couple, I'm not doing what I want to do. And so that is something that I get a huge amount of joy out of spreading that story and watching it affect others from this little kernel. And I admit, I love getting to cuddle with people. That's a lovely thing, and I enjoy the excuse to do it in LARPs.
And then there's fan art of you cuddling with people.
Then there's actually fan art of my character, and my character from World Magical is now husband, cuddling with, like, hugging each other and behind with a full moon behind
It's
them.
really cute.
I never thought fan art would be made of it. Oh, LARP.
So yeah, for me, like, oh god, I'm just thinking about New World Magical and romance in particular. Like, New World Magical was my first official LARP. Like, I had done some LARP adjacent things. Like, came initially from the world of other games and immersive theater. Oddly, I also like exploring romance and immersive theater, but that's like having things done to you and you don't really have a say in what's going on. That's not quite as cool as LARP, where you actually but I feel like my general answer is pretty basic, where I'm looking for, really to answer two questions. What is the character I'm playing capable of doing, and are they capable of being in a relationship? So, and also, how am I as an actual person outside of this character? What am I capable of in a relationship? Because you're exploring a lot more variety in a LARP relationship than you probably would. And also it's really intense and usually condensed into like a much shorter time. Like, you can get years of real life relationship experience in a way condensed into like a really short, or at least events that would happen in a relationship. Because there's that urgency of like, well, you don't say like, oh, we'll do it next year, you gotta do it now because the game isn't gonna keep going past like someday. But it is like, it's interesting to kind of have those two channels open in your head at the same time. Okay, my character is feeling and thinking this and is capable of this. They're capable of this behavior, making these sacrifices or standing up for themselves in this way. How am I parallel to that, or how am I different? Like, the juxtaposition is really interesting to me and a little distracting sometimes while playing if I'm thinking all these thoughts at once, but really worth it in retrospect to go and reflect on these things.
So what do I enjoy? I think that the one of the things I very much enjoy about playing romance, and not just with the person or people that I'm actively in the romance with, but also with all the other people who are around, is that it's a really good opportunity and excuse for me as a player to show my character's vulnerability, which is not always a thing that is done in public settings, which we're often playing in, or in larger groups of people. And so you can create small moments with people wherein you begin to show the layers of your character, the facade cracks, and you show some of the vulnerability, and that can really generate closeness and trust and authenticity of play, where you realize that this person who is dealing with whatever it is they're dealing with in their public persona also has this sort of internal monologue, and allows me to externalize what's going on inside my head and my character's internal feelings.
Being at the end of the line here, a lot of what I had to say, it was as pretty much said by everybody else. It also depends on the game itself. Is it a one-shot game which lasts a weekend and that's it? Is it a campaign game that I go to every month? Is it a free form that I play and it's in the ingredients list of the game itself that romance can and possibly are involved? That's something you gotta take into consideration. What kind of type of game is it? And then also feeling out the other players as well, if they also too want a romance that are okay with that. Because if it's there on the list and no one else wants to touch it, you're like, oh, okay, I guess we won't. And but what I enjoy from these experiences, or at least what I try to go with, is like what Kate and Cameron says. Not only be able to have this experience and have this one person, but having adjacent people that are around and know, and be able to talk to them about your drama or your hardships or how you're feeling and why did they do that to me and all that stuff. And yeah, I think it's it brings more to the game than just it's something you can add from your basket to the game itself.
Well, to start the other way, so you get to say all the good stuff first.
Oh, geez, okay. Oh boy.
You know, in that vulnerability, like, vulnerability means that the possibility of getting hurt, and I have a question about responsibility. So as players, what do you feel is your responsibility to each other when you play with
Communication.
something?
So much flippin' communication. Like if you don't talk about what you want as a player and what you want to give your characters and like how you respect each other's boundaries, how are you supposed to know like you've hurt somebody or if you've been hurt and like, you know, if you don't have clear communication. Like I'm playing a campaign game right now where I am like this great romantic character, and they and I both talk constantly about like our characters' boundaries and like our own personal boundaries as players and where we want to take it. So just keeping that going, start it up, and then just constantly reaffirming it is something that I highly recommend to do, so no one gets hurt along the way.
We're right back. We're good next. Responsibility, I think. I think that in all aspects of play, but in romance perhaps it comes out more clearly. You're responsible for understanding your role in the subtext of any given scene. Listening to what it is that the person who you're in the scene with is saying, what the story context is, and making sure that realizing that because romance can be a very deeply affecting and emotional process, that the choices that you are making, you may need to give more than you might want to from a story level into that relationship, because the other person's story is also affected by it. So depending on where they're at emotionally, what their needs are, and what their sort of the signals they're giving to you, you should very seriously consider. You should never flippantly betray someone in a romance. You should always layer it. If you need to do that for some reason, you should always try to layer it, give them a deep, complex emotional response that they can begin to understand and contextualize what's happening to their experience and their character's experience. I'm sure there's more responsibilities, but I'm going to leave it at that.
Well, going off that, there's two things that come to mind immediately, and one is kind of actually a post-game thing where I think it's important. I mean, in an ideal situation, there are plenty of reasons why this wouldn't be able to take place, but keep that communication open post-game, because romantic lead is a thing. It's a very intense, real thing. And there could be a lot of questions that you don't, like during the debrief or like during the afters or the post-game party. There are a lot of questions or feelings that aren't going to come up right in that immediate time afterwards, and they're going to pop up later, like maybe that week, maybe a month from then. And I think it's important that if you're engaging in some kind of romantic plot with somebody or multiple people, that you allow space to remain open for communication, even if you personally feel you're done with the romance, like it's because somebody else might still have lingering things and lingering feelings, and it is so much more helpful to keep communications open than to be like, well, I'm not feeling anything, so like good luck with that. Yeah, and also just it is tempting, I think, for players sometimes to see an opportunity in a romance plot of, wow, wouldn't it be so epic if I like sacrificed myself by throwing myself off a cliff right now? And but then you might not be thinking about it, but you're giving the person you're playing romance with a plot line where their lover just committed suicide or sacrificed themselves, and they might not have signed up for that. And it's an epic moment, but you're also kind of maybe hijacking that person's story as well, and their story kind of becomes about that. And if both people or everybody involved are like, yeah, let's go for it, this is like so depressing and this is exactly how I want to feel, then like by all means go jump off the cliff, or Larp jump off the cliff. But otherwise, talk about it first.
A lot of people, as I'm going to be in line, so people have said a lot of stuff. I always, before I play romance with someone, I will sit down beforehand and lay out very explicit, like, these are my touch boundaries. Where are those? We are going to check on those constantly through the game. This is going to be a consistent thing, and we're going to both agree that, like, if I say no, that's fine, and the other person will be okay with that. We are going to be on the same page as to what we think about bleed. Because some people actually seek, like, romantic bleed and want to engage in that and do things then. I personally don't usually seek romantic bleed. I love having romances, but I usually don't want that to bleed into my regular life. So I want to make sure that whoever I'm playing a romance with is on that same wavelength, because otherwise things can get really bad and messy. We just, expectation setting of that kind of a nature. And then just constant communication throughout the entire thing. I check, like when I do weekend-long LARPs, I will check in with the person who I'm doing the romance with, like, every few hours, just to be like, even if we haven't, like, had much plot, like, okay, how are we doing? Where do we want to see this go? Do we want to do this scene later? Okay, how are we going to do that? I mean, yeah, I know that breaks immersion, but to me, immersion is not. I find immersion just as a player, as a much smaller thing that can be more easily jumped in and out of. And then I'm going to just reinforce what Clio said, like, keep things going after the game. And yeah, that's the thing. And romantic bleed is 100% real. You will think you're a bleed champion. I thought I was a bleed champion. And it also allows you to explore other things with romance. Like, I thought I was a bleed champion, and then I had a poly romance at Event Horizon. And then I started dating the person who I had a romance with, and I was never poly before. And now I am. Whoa! Crazy. And I kind of discovered that about myself. So that's also wonderful about romance. But, like, even if you think you're a bleed champion, like, recognize that that's not a thing. And be very careful about that and your boundaries. And if you're feeling, shoot, this is going and I don't want to go that way, talk to the player you're doing romance with and explain why you might be pulling back or something like that. Because it's really about keeping yourself, them and yourself safe and not hard feelings. Yay, I'm done.
Congratulations on your romance.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
So obviously now I'm on the end again. So a lot of excellent things have been said. I especially want to echo the idea of staying in touch afterwards, which the first time I ever did a romance thing, I sucked at. And I feel super guilty about it still. So now I try to make it up to that person. But one thing I want to say is that basically, I think in LARP, there's three different kinds of romance. There's the imposed LARP, where given a character, it says you are with this person and you love them oh so much. Okay. There's planned, where you have a say in it and you're articulating it. And then there's an emergent one. Last summer when I played New World Magiscola, I did not realize I was in a romance plot until I was midway through a waltz with a Fey Duchess. And
Like, I'm not too fast.
what the? Because I had actually kind of been avoiding romance plots, and then I was in one, and it was a bit of a surprise, very pleasant surprise. But that meant having to talk after the end of the LARP, especially. And there's a tool that I think Dan and Beard developed it, but certainly popularized it, which they would send out on Facebook, which would talk about different kinds of feelings that you have for other players or characters in terms of whether or not you were attracted to them aesthetically, felt romantic attraction, felt maybe a little romantic attraction, like a little squish, and broke it down into 6 different kind of categories as a way of interacting, and effectively extends a debrief into a different space. Past the in front of all your friends in the world, at the end of the LARP, and sometimes after you've had a little time to think about it and maybe realized you had feelings that you hadn't realized and that are difficult. And that tool has made a lot of difference for people, I think.
Nice.
What was that tool again, and where can I find it?
Danny shares it on Facebook a lot. To be honest, the easiest thing for me to do would be for you to write to me or for me to send it out to Alex, and Alex can send it out.
Yeah, exchange business cards after,
Yeah.
after the panel.
If you
And
could
we
do
will have a Q&A.
part of this panel write-up.
Yeah, we can put it in the write-up.
I'm assuming, I know people have emailed at least one of you for advice on in-game romances. In addition to this sort of solid columns of talk to each other about expectations and keep talking to each other about expectations and continue talking to each other about expectations even after the LARP. Are there any other things, either like pratfalls, don't make the same mistake I did, things like that? Again, as a player.
Yeah. Well, for one thing, there is the staying in contact, but it's also, when you've played romance, you've had a shared intense experience that can create a feeling of connection that it's not necessarily an actual connection, but it is certainly a feeling of connection that can be built on. And sometimes one person can feel like that ought to be romance, and another person's like, not really. And as in any other part of the world with love, you have to realize you do not have a right to that person's feelings. And that can be tough, even though it sounds weird, but it can be tough. And learning how to accept that and talk about it and deal with it. But realizing that truth.
So, other like pratfalls, things like that. As I said, I kind of talked about my main pratfall of just thinking I was a bleed champion and failing. But I will say one thing that made me feel really more comfortable with that is I waited 4 weeks until after the LARP and kept on keeping in touch with this person and was very careful that I was not, there's an article that just came out called About LARP Crushes, which is about falling in love with a character and not that person. And I think it's a really good article, and I think that it is something that we should, I'm not saying it's wrong to fall in love with a character, but recognize that's what you're doing and being cognizant of that and make a conscious decision if that's something that you want to continue to pursue if you are having those feelings. As I said, I'm usually not interested in that, and so when that happened, I tried to give a lot of space and spent a lot of time with the person as the person afterwards, which helped clarify a lot of things. I guess the other thing that was my big pratfall move. I am the person who gets questions about how to play romances in game, which is a weird place to be an expert on. And I think the reason is because I think that's something that's really useful to do. As I said, I make things really public. So I'm the romance that I did was between two professors at New World Magiscola, and because I worked very hard to include other characters and matchmaking our characters together. And I worked very hard to have the scene in which we reunited during a ritual, be surrounded by 5 other people who were all helping us with this. And because of that, people got really invested in our story and other stories. And that, and just being willing to kind of go to that place and go to, as I said, I'm a touching person. So being willing to go and not hide your romance under a bushel, and let its light shine throughout the LARP is the best advice that I can give to not only making a satisfying romance, but making a satisfying game for others.
Yeah, I also, I mean, the main thing was figure out whether or not you have a crush on the character or the person.
Oh gosh,
right?
yes.
Because, and sometimes you can think, oh, well, if this player is playing this character, obviously they put themselves into the character. And look, sometimes it's true, I mean, everyone puts a little bit of themselves in, right?
I was
But-
pretty sure that it wasn't the character, because that character was an alcoholic, emotionally distant war criminal.
But yeah, like, because sometimes someone will be trying to play a personality that's very different from their own, and like, they're really good at it, but unfortunately, like, you end up falling for those traits. But also, this is a little bit tricky territory, but if you find yourself in the middle, especially a longer game, and the romance isn't working out for you, like there's just something that's just not sitting right, you feel uncomfortable, you're not having a good time. I mean, again, it's just harping on the idea of communicating, but I think it's infinitely better to like sit down and talk out a character with the person you're playing a romance with and be like, you know, I thought I was going to enjoy doing this, but I'm not in the right headspace. Because it's gonna not be fun for them either if you're kind of going, both dragging yourselves through the game and they're not having a good time and you're not having a good time. And if romance, something's really important to them, like a theme they really, really want to explore, then maybe there's still time for them to find other people who might be interested in that. I just think, I do see a lot of people who try to force themselves to enjoy romance plots, and because a lot of other people do, they're like, I really should do this, let me try it, and I'll try it again, I'll try it again. If it's not your thing, it's like, it's not your thing, and if it's not working with like a certain character, then it's just not working, and that's like totally okay. Yeah, it's just about talking through that whole thing with the players so feelings don't get hurt as much as possible.
So this is about cautions? Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah. Well, any additional advice,
All right,
like when you
So
get asked.
I think that there's an interplay between, that leads me to a caution, which is to say, like, if you play successful romance with someone else, it's a lot about giving them attention and making them feel like you are attentive to them, regardless of, so my advice is that when you get excited, keep a few things to yourself. Like, that's always like a good idea. Like, you start feeling like very much invested in it, like it's actually probably a time to step back just a little bit from it. The other caution that I would have is not to let your romance define your character entirely. Because it puts a lot of pressure on the other person, and if it doesn't work, the whole system can break down. And actually, also, most people are attracted to people who have other things going on in their lives other than just. So, like, seriously, like, you will make a better romance if you have some other things that you really care about and that you want, and that you're playing back and forth. And how can you give up something meaningful to you as a token of a romantic gesture if you don't care about anything else? So it gives you a lot more to play with, and that's my recommendation.
And line again. I'd say just check in with yourself. See how you're feeling about these things. How are you starting to feel uncomfortable? Are you starting to feel bored? Are you starting to feel this bleed of attraction come from LARP crushes versus actual crushes on the player? Just keep these things in mind whenever you are trying to like play these romances, so you don't get caught in the bleed, because bleed is real.
It's so real. I'd like anyone who feels called to answer this question, whether or not you've done any work into yourself. Still value your opinion very much. What do you feel that an organizer's or a designer's responsibility is to their players, either designing for romance or knowing that romantic plot lines are going to happen in character?
Well, if you're creating a place where romance is possible, then it's important to talk about the implications and after effects. I can say that one design tool that I've really appreciated that's been instituted is modifying name tags, such as putting like a red dot on it if you are open to romance, or modified colors depending on it. That's a relatively recent innovation, but it seems to me to make a very large difference. I think it's also important to determine boundaries for the game that you're writing. Obviously, if you're in a game like Just a Little Lovin', there's going to be sex, but you can say how far things are going to go within the parameters of the game. And personally, I would also encourage relationships other than romance, traditional romances, for one thing. Like, encourage a broader concept of what love is, can be, and possibly even should be. I've said like 3 things, and I hope I left stuff for my friends over here.
Yeah, as I said, I don't necessarily feel like I do organizing, so I guess I can speak to that. I think that I was going to mention the thing because I feel like the most important thing as an organizer designing games is to let people calibrate their experience. And even if I make romance a very important theme in the game, I want to let people be able to opt out of that, and I want to let people be able to hit their level of comfort in their amount that they want to engage with it, especially in a larger game. In a smaller game, I can make it very obvious, like this is the level, this is the expectation that I'm having for everyone. Like I can say right out front, like this game is going to expect you to use Arzamandi, which is a tool for simulating more intimacy than you would usually want to do in public. It's my polite way of saying sex. And so that, but like for a large group especially, you want to be able to calibrate, and I think it's really important to let people do, if they want to go, if the game allows for something like that, allow for that to happen, but have a space that's apart from maybe the rest of the game, so people can't opt out of that kind of play. Because for example, for myself, I was interested in some of the Nordic games sound very interesting to me, but I am myself not comfortable with extremely public displays of affection that are very obvious. And some of those games include that, and there's not really a way to pull out of that. And to me, it's extraordinarily important to allow people to opt out and calibrate that experience. That was a very windy answer, so I'm tired.
Lizzie, well, I'm going to throw in one thing real quick. Lizzie starts in residency, has this thing where you go skinny dipping in the pool, and hey George, and you go like underneath the sheet, and that's the implied thing. You're under the sheet, there's hanky-panky. So still the equivalent without being overly graphic.
My Americans were curious.
I like the word hanky-panky.
Thank you, Jason.
I'm old.
Yeah, I mean, I run smaller games. I don't usually organize larger events, but for me, it's all about casting a little bit. Like some characters kind of require romance in a lot of ways, and others are like not as like if you're playing like a hermit or something. Like you're gonna have a harder time finding. Or a romantic hermit. Romantic hermit would actually be a great character though. But like if you have a say in casting people and like someone, if romance is like a pretty heavy theme of the game, definitely kind of ask your players before casting them, like how much romance they want, how much they want to be witnessing, if they want to be in like a really troubled romance before you cast them in like the most angsty romance role, because you don't want to cast the one person who is like starting to explore this area of LARP in like the most demanding romantic role ever as like their first dip in the pool. Because you could like scar them for life. But yeah, it's just kind of actually opening up a dialogue with the players before kind of trying to prod them into doing something they might not be ready for.
I have a lot to say on this stuff, apparently. So first, I really like the idea of opt-out. I think that it is responsibility of the facilitator and the designer to give people a place to opt into if they opt out of that. It kind of mirrors the thing I was saying before. You shouldn't have the only thing, your character shouldn't only be interested in that romance. If I decide that I need to opt out of this romance, there should be a place for me to opt into. And when you're talking to your players during the middle of the game, or you're designing before the game, that you should always try to be giving them a choice between 2 equally valid and interesting experiences, at least 2. So it's not just like, well, just go back and do your romance. So they feel like there's another direction that they can go in. If you're interested in facilitating romance in your game, there is a bunch of things that you need to do, including what I just said, but also talking about public space, when you're thinking about it and you want to write a game that is where romance is possible, you need to think about your location, your set. You need to think about the kinds of places where you would feel comfortable being vulnerable and where you would not be vulnerable. So the war room in the White House may not be the best setting if you want to have a lot of development of vulnerable connections, where everyone's like focusing on each other and looking at each other. You need some nooks and crannies. You need to think about the flow of your game in a physical space, and also about plot balancing. Again, that war room is terrible because if you're talking about whether or not you're going to destroy a nation, it's not the most conducive time to be thinking about your romantic entanglements, right? So a big plots can destroy romance. And the last thing I'll say is that the mechanics, the structure, and the forms that you create in your game are models that your players will follow in terms of what romance means in your game. Also, how you describe your game. Is romance a lighthearted thing? Is it very, very serious? Is physical intimacy tied to romantic feelings, or is it something which is some way separated, which comes first, intimacy or romance in your game, and thinking about all of that? Those are all responsibilities that you need to provide to help the players structure their romantic experiences if you really want to design for romance.
Well.
Sorry.
Yes. Yes.
Sorry, what to say on that?
That's all I gotta say is yes, all that. No, for real, just going back over everything that everybody else has said. Yeah, boundaries, calibrate your experience, casting surveys are fantastic, by the way, for really getting to know the players themselves and like seeing where they want to play. Especially if we have like these pre-written rules, like for example, like a one-shot 4-hour game or a one-shot weekend game. Like it really depends on like what you're looking for that little bit of time. So I think that's great. When it comes to games like campaign games, for example, though, if there isn't a mechanic already established, players will find a way and establish mechanics in there. For example, when I played Sophia Rising, we drew in our Lamandi whenever we wanted to do like, some more intimate scenes, or a lot of people did Fade to Black and they were uncomfortable for that as well. So even if it isn't specifically in the 300-page rule book, they will find a way to add something to it.
Have any, I don't want to put anyone on the spot to think of examples, but if anyone has recommendations of games that they think mechanically reinforce interesting romantic relationships, toss them out there.
There's this, yeah.
There's a game called Summer Loving.
Yeah, out of Esterling.
Yeah, Carrots and Nose, so we played. So yeah, basically you are at this music festival and you do flashback scenes and you talk about sex with your partners where you're facing each other, your knees are touching, you're staring each other in the eye. And it's like, okay, so this happens, and you're like, yes, and then this happens. And it goes into like sort of like in-depth sort of thing. So it gives you that awkward closeness as well as makes you have that also awkward closeness in general. So it's fascinating and fun, and I made a good friend like that. So
I wanted to say there's this game that was out on Kickstarter recently. It was a Jenga tower. I don't know if you know that game.
What's it called?
It's called Starcross.
It's pretty friggin' sweet.
It's extremely good.
Okay,
I know the designer.
There's a series of games actually that use a system called the Travail System, which is not exactly the kind of romance we've been talking about up till now. It's more of this sort of like high concept of romance, of like grand gestures and things like that. And the system works such that you have each character has a list of their heart's desires, and any other character can come and request one, and then go and quest to try to achieve that person's heart's desires. And should they achieve enough of them, then those two characters will be in capital R romantic love. And it's a very interesting sort of interplay where the person who's giving out those heart's desires can give out really, really hard ones or really, really easy ones that will calibrate sort of how they feel about that. There's an interesting kind of system that is less about the interpersonal and more about sort of like how it sits in the setting.
Sorry, what was that called again?
I call it the Travail System. It is a game that I first encountered it in called the King's Musketeers, which is a weekend-long interactive literature game, and it's been used in several other games like that as well. But that's why I call it the Travail System. Other games probably have a different word for it, but it's Travail means the works, the great works, I think, of romance. Is that right? Look at mine.
You might also look at emotional baggage, which is a really lovely LARP that explores a wide variety of different types of relationships. Golly, it's just excellent. How about we roll with that? Susan, I can't remember her last name. She was one of the co-writers. Maybe it was her.
Susan Weiner and Quinn D.
Thank you.
I forget if they were co-authors. So.
Yeah, so it's got a lot of secrets that I shall not unveil to you, but if you wanted a game that explores relationships from multiple angles, it is a fun one to play with.
If you like sad romance games, Jaylee's Mermaid has plenty of opportunities for that.
Oh, and we should probably mention the romance trilogy,
Yeah.
because that is amazing. Emily Karabas is amazing, and so are her games. I'm not going to remember all three of the names off the top of my head. Breaking the Ice.
Shooting the moon.
Under My Skin.
Yeah. So all excellent games.
Well, we got about 15 minutes left, and I want to go into questions, but actually the audience seems to have a bunch of recommendations. Does anyone in the audience want to recommend a game?
I would recommend 183 Days by James Stewart and Sarah Williamson. It's an amazing two-player role-playing game, very intimate, amazing.
Yep.
Also, Doubt on the other end, deep form game about uncertainty and doubt in relationships, betrayal.
Play the game of Intercom Love Letters. They're the 3-act structure, and during intermission, we're physically writing letters to romantic partners.
Critical Path, where each year you're in a space vessel, and each time you sort of transfer through like hyperspace, your reality shifts in just one way, and it's always about the relationships of the characters shifting. And then when you come back into real space, you're back to regular reality, you remember everything that happened, and it keeps happening. And so these different romances keep popping up, and then you have to come back to regular reality and be like, whoa, is that actually how I feel? And there's lots of plays, and there's many of them.
There's also a game called Les Petites Choses Oubliées, which is made by 2 people whose names I forget, but you can find it online. It's this beautiful set of postcards with pictures on them, and you play 2 people who used to be in a relationship and had their minds erased, so they both forget the romantic relationship they were in. And they have these postcards, like pictures of times that they spent together. And so they go through it and slowly recover some memories, and then they decide if they're gonna try again.
What's it
What's it
called?
called?
Les petites choses oubliées, the little forgotten things in French.
I'd also, again, in the sad romance genre, which is my specialty, I guess, Deranged by
Yes,
Maria
that's
Maria
right.
Yes. It's my favorite game to run. I like to make people cry in it.
You succeeded.
It made my husband actually play a romance. It was his first romance ever in the game of Clio.
Such a success.
I was so proud of him. He texted me.
So we have about 15 minutes.
Sorry, what was that one again?
Deranged.
And it's got, like, he told me, like, one of my favorite mechanics of when you kiss, players just simply touch each other's hands and hold it like that. And that's so, like, beautiful and simple, but very intimate at the same time.
We added that in.
Is that yours?
That's Stephanie Noodle.
Okay, whatever, that was, like, I want to grab that and take that to, like, every game I play.
As someone who's not comfortable playing out a lot of physical stuff in reality, I love what Arsamandi allowing or calling out or as a possibility, or specifically writing games that make a lot of use of Arsamandi allows for. So I've really enjoyed getting used to Arsamandi and the couple of LARPs I've played with it, which were Retreat last night and After Party, which Susan, I think Susan wrote? What? No, Kate. I think Susan ran my part.
So, are we ready to move into questions? Do people have questions?
Did anyone mention group date at any point?
Nope.
Oh, Group Date by Sarah Williamson, also a good one. But we should move into questions because there's a bajillion of them. But that's a good one to end on because it's my favorite.
I want to respond to Arsamandi super fast. Because there was a thing, one aspect of that is doing the locked eyes technique, which can be intense. And I've done that workshop with people who are uncomfortable with the romantic notions of it. So what we actually did was put a table between us. In that case, what we were doing was we were using it to have other kinds of love, like between sisters or a mother and a daughter, or something like that. But actually having a physical object between you can actually create just enough physical separation that people are comfortable, more comfortable anyway, doing locked eyes. Be prepared to flinch a whole lot in that first minute, but it does create a good feeling of connection.
Builds off, I think, of some examples that people have given, but do you have any tips either in how this is played or in the negotiations between of how to perform strenuous or difficult romances?
I come from freeform. I break character, and I negotiate it because it could get emotionally charged, and that can be unsafe. So want to be clear ahead of time. And if it's going to be emotionally charged, my opinion is whether or not you come from freeform, breaking character is kind of where I would roll with that. That's me.
Are you talking about like introducing difficult elements into a romance, or are you talking about just playing it? Like, how do you make?
I just mean real bad ones.
Right.
Yeah. So if you know like this is the goal or this is the way the story is going into the romance, I personally try to make whatever character I'm playing as different from me as possible, so I have that extra like layer of separation, and I find that's like the one thing that helps the most for me personally.
When I'm playing a really difficult or challenging romance, I deeply love doing that. So like I get a like deep and abiding joy in doing that. But I am very focused on not only breaking character, but like kind of, I want to really get to know that person beforehand. Like that's really important to me. If I know, even if it's just like, let's talk 15 minutes before this game and really like get to know each other as people, because then I know that that is not that person and it's not me, and I can keep that separation in my mind, and I will take, even if we're not like, I totally agree with Jason doing that charge thing, but like taking 15 minutes at lunch or in the middle of the game to break completely and just talk with that person as a person. Again, just to remind yourself that that is what they are, and they are not you are not a horrible, horrible person, and they are not a horrible, horrible person, and things aren't actually exploding your life. I do the same thing when I play a villain, or I'm really antagonizing someone. I do the exact same thing. So I treat it very much like I'm playing an evil person, because I usually am. Or a character who's very messed up. I'm telling myself this right now because I'm doing that at Magic School this summer. So.
You're oddly enough looking for continuous, enthusiastic consent.
I also go off with people I trust. Like if I'm playing a game that with people that I know of, and these relationships do happen, I try to, just because of that layer of vulnerability of being like such to the extreme of this game sort of game and whatnot, I try to keep it with people I know, because I like they're allowing me to do this and I allow them to do this because we're close like that. So if it's someone who I don't really know and I don't have the time, even 15 minutes may not even be enough for me, honestly. Like I may need to like have like a week talking to them, maybe like 2 weeks, maybe a month. Like it just really depends on like how extreme it's going to be and how much of emotional turmoil it's going to cause me as a player. and how much, that's gonna affect things in general.
So I think the point that I'm hearing from other people, and I'm just going to reinforce in a slightly different way, is that you need to make it clear that this relationship is an in-game relationship, right? And that can be dropping out of game either on a macro scale, long conversations. It can be very micro situations where if you're having some sort of difficult, intense scene that you break character just for a moment to change your facial expression to let them know that you are you and they are them. That can also work, but also there's also a designer role in that, which is that if you are going to include that in your game, it's good to, it gives the players someone to point to say, or the design of the game to point to and be like, this game has told me to be this way. That's part of the alibi, which allows you to play it that way. In very scripted games, that can mean that when you read your character sheet or your background, you recognize the kind of relationship that you're in, and you walk into that even if you don't know the other person, understanding that this is the direction that you have been given, and that they understand that this is the direction that you've been given, that they have the direction that they've been given, and that you are there to experience how these players play out that direction from the game. In a freeform game, that's usually more of a directive of, this is going to be in this game, people are going to be acting to you in this way, and that can help keep that line crisp between how much I'm just, feeling like I need to vent and get my cruelty out on you, versus how much this is about laying it and relying on the structure or depth of the game.
Great question. Thanks, everyone. Do we have any more?
I was wondering if you had advice for players who want to engage in romantic storylines with other people, but they don't want to touch. Whether or not the game system particularly, makes room for it, if that's a particular player's preference.
I mean, to me, again, it's all about. To me, it's all about that communication. So saying, I'm interested in, explicitly saying, I'm interested in playing, I think you can totally play a romance without touching. My preference is to touch just because I'm that person, but you totally can do that. And it's all about emotional openness and eye contact and words and things like that. Touch is not to me a necessary aspect of playing a romance, and as long as you are explicit about that with the person that you are playing that romance with, and just saying my boundary is, as I said, I always put touch boundaries, my boundary is no touch. Are you okay with that? And if they are, then we can do it. And if they're not, realize that that's not going to be a thing that you can play, because you've got to have that trust that they're not going to break that.
I would go along with that, and looking into the ideas of love languages themselves. If touch isn't the one that is at the bottom of the list, maybe figure out, okay, is it communication? Is it quality time? Is it going to be expressions or gifts or anywho. So you really have to see, would it be better if we spent time together, we went on long walks around the lake together and just talked and spent time together, or would it be better if I helped you with problems that you're having, or just having the communication of what kind of love language that you are having to really understand if touch is going to get the bottom of the list, see what other ones can be replaced instead.
Can it please actually be super powerful not to touch someone? We even casually, I was having a very interesting conversation about this a few months ago. Someone who was playing in a long-term romantic relationship for many years in a game that forbid touch of any kind. And it is something that gives you something that you can lean against. It's hard to explain, but imagine if there's a piece of glass between you and me. I can put all of my sort of emotional force on that glass as if I want to reach you, but there's something stopping me from doing that, and the game itself can actually create a very interesting situation where it's clear that this is something, some distance that exists because the world demands it or because they demand it. And so, like, it depends a little bit on why there's no touch and how that dynamic works out. But I actually feel like look at the tools that you are working with and try to figure out what kinds of authenticity you can get out of those tools and what kind of sort of narrative and emotional experience you can get from them. Most of the traditions I come from is a no-touch tradition, although people do casually touch quite frequently. Yeah, I think that there's definitely a place for that. I would agree. Pay attention to them. Always check in like visually with them.
Mm-hmm.
Like you want, when they look over at you, you want to already be looking at them. It's a great way to show that this is that they're a priority to you. These things don't require touch, and also shifting dramatically between levels of intimacy in your conversation is a sign, and people recognize as a sign that's a complex relationship and a vulnerable relationship where you're talking about something very functional and you switch very quickly into something very, very personal and then back out again, is another way that people communicate when they're very, very close to someone, and people will react to that. So those are a few ways that might create intimacy without touch.
We have a question here in the back.
Yeah, this is building off of that a bit, and it's more like, I guess because I'm not fairly new to Larp, it's a cultural thing I'm not sure of that exists, but I identify as being on like the A spectrum, so stuff like Arzamandi is in a lot of games, but it makes me very uncomfortable. So I really want to play those games, but is it just those are games that are not meant, like, is it not possible to participate them without participating in that kind of mechanic?
I know for sure it is possible.
Yeah,
So I haven't really seen that.
there could be games that I'm not familiar with, but generally speaking, it serves as just, okay, if your characters get intimate, here's what we'll do. But it's rare for a game to have required intimacy, like, you must.
Yeah, that's what I was saying, like, with my thing, like, as an organizer, I'm always gonna make sure that that's not a option, like, not a forced thing, because I recognize that, like, I personally have never done Arzamandi. I don't know if I would, I'm not on the A spectrum, but, like, it kind of freaks me out too. So, like, I've avoided those games kind of as well. But
I just feel like that'd be super fun.
yeah, no, I know what you mean, but I think that the good ones, not the good ones, but good organizers will recognize that that is not for everyone and still will give you into the community.
It's a legitimate question for the organizer of the game.
Yes.
I think
But there are also two things, right? There's whether or not you want to engage in intimacy, physical intimacy with people, and whether or not you want to tell those stories. And that second one is a trickier one where you really need to ask the question, because there are games that are very much about romantic entanglements and intimacy that don't require any touch, but are definitely stories about that.
Right.
And so, the first one, I don't think I can think of any game which absolutely requires you to touch anyone. Maybe
a little bird does.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
there are some games that have,
So-
but it would be rare.
But the second one, I think, is, the game may be really about that, and not engaging with it might mean that you don't really have anything to engage with.
Yeah.
So it really depends on where your comfort levels are, and so I agree, check in with the organizers, or read the materials if it's the kind of game where you can read the materials.
I personally know several ace players within New World Magiscola who have pursued that kind of play. So that's why I was like, I know it's possible. I don't have first-hand experience other than observing and appreciating. So.
Yeah, and I will say it is possible to go, sorry, we're trying to go into it.
Well, we have about 2 minutes left.
All right.
I want to grab the last question.
It wasn't a question, I wanted to follow on to that, because especially as an Arzamandi example, I've seen something work really well where because it's sort of default assumption even in no-touch cultures is casual touch happens anyway and everyone just sort of accepts it. The folks who are not comfortable with that are often like feel silenced or like they can't say anything because it's like a less common need or boundary. And if the organizer knows that, and they are willing to just ask everyone to close their eyes and raise their hand, like for what level of touch you're comfortable with. Even a game that's supposed to use, like I played After Party, which was supposed to use that mechanic, but we did an eyes closed, raise your hand calibration beforehand to figure out how much touching, if any, was going to be acceptable in that game, and that meant like there was much less risk for anyone expressing their boundary. That was not even necessarily answer to your question, but it's related.
So after seeing that eyes closed thing, does the organizer then declare what the level is?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Person, do you have a question?
Oh, I just had a very quick comment about Ars Armandi. I've seen Ars Armandi used two different ways. In one way, I've seen it used to actually represent these two characters are now having sex. I've also seen Ars Armandi as a way to express intimacy.
Yeah.
So not necessarily sex, but just like emotional intimacy. So platonic Ars Armandi? Question mark?
Well, I really like the idea that Ars Armandi does not have to mean sex. It can be any kind of touch that the players are not comfortable with. A hug. I don't feel like hugging people in real life. Let's do it with Ars Armandi because I'm willing to touch someone's hand. So it
Interesting thing
absolutely
about
does not have to mean sex.
Interesting sort of like weird thing about Ars Armandi sometimes is that when you declare touch as being representative of something else, you actually sometimes end up with less touch in the game.
Yeah.
Because if I now put my hand out and I just want to touch your hand, now we're not sure what that means. Therefore, if it's not a useful gesture, if it's not like absolutely important, then we don't do it, right? So like it actually puts more emphasis on the touch, which actually can modulate that that actual touching, that not actual touching.
So we are at 4:30, so I think we should wrap up by giving our panelists a huge round of applause.